But there was a couple times where I filmed dying Afghans. Have never used most of that footage because I was just like, why did I zoom in there? This isn't like a Hollywood set. Like, this is not somebody with fake blood and a fake blown up leg or something. Like, this is somebody like that's probably gonna die and that's injured. Later, when I looked at the footage, that's when I was able to process it, was shocked by it. My name is Robert Ham. I am an Army veteran, joined in 2007 and was in for about 7 years active and then another 3 years reserve. I was an Army combat correspondent, combat videographer. And grew up in Reseda, California, known for The Karate Kid. I was like right down the street when they made that movie, and there was like a karate place that I went to that was like right there. So I was really into Karate Kid because he was from Reseda. And grew up low, you know, kind of like lower middle class, not a ton of money. Parents were artists. My dad was a traveling musician. My dad's from Fort Worth and my mom is from Detroit. In the early 80s, was playing with Cher in Las Vegas. After Cher had broken up with Sonny, she had started her residency in Las Vegas, and my dad and his brother were in her band. And my dad was like the backup singer, and he played some like sax and stuff. And there's some funny clips of him online playing with Cher in the 80s. And my mom was a groupie and was in Vegas with her mom, my grandma, and her best friend. And she had a crush on my dad from Cher, called him backstage, when you could do that, I guess, and they hooked up, and I was the fruit of their love. They both were living in Los Angeles at that time. My mom was, going to Cal Arts, which is an art school in Los Angeles, and my dad was just traveling. They got married, and I grew up in Los Angeles too. My dad was gone a lot. He was a traveling musician. A lot of like 80s, 90s bands and stuff. So he was gone a lot. So I kind of grew up like on my bike, kind of like the latchkey generation, just did kind of what I wanted and never really interested in military. 2 grandfathers were military though. They never really talked about it. My mom's dad was Marine, fought in Iwo Jima, joined December 8th after Pearl Harbor. The Army wouldn't take him, so he joined the Marines. On those ships on the way, fought in Guam and Iwo Jima. And then my other grandfather was drafted at 17 and went to Europe and was wounded, hit by grenade shrapnel about a week before the Battle of Bastogne. And he was in Patton's tanker division as an infantry. And so he was evac'd out after he got wounded and with a Purple Heart. Both of my grandfathers really never talked much about the war, as most of that generation did. So I didn't really have access to it. And my dad was a conscientious objector in Vietnam War. He did not, but he was young, didn't believe in the Vietnam War, was, a musician and everything. I had no interest in the military until 9/11. I was always into filming and cameras, and that's what I did. I had artist parents who like cultivated my desire to be a filmmaker. I had a video camera as young, filmed everything, made stupid short films with my friends in high school, then got an undergrad degree in film. I was 18 when 9/11 happened. Still living at my parents' house, still collecting action figures and comic books. And I was, living in Los Angeles, and I remember the towers falling and just thinking, what is this world that we live in? What is going on? And I had too many questions and not enough answers. And that kind of started the journey. I was a really bad high school student. I think I hated high school. I went to Granada Hills High, graduated in May of 2001 from high school. Only got into one college, very conservative Christian college. I was just trying to get my life straight. This was the college that was going to make me study and fix my academic stuff and help me get on the straight and narrow, because I was kind of all over the place in high school. I had just started my undergrad at this college. I was still living at my parents' house. I was still sleeping, and my mom came in crying. And she's like, we're under attack. I mean, she was freaking out. Because by that point, from Los Angeles, we're 3 hours behind. I hadn't seen either one of the towers hit because it had already happened. I was just a kid. I was 18, not feeling like an adult. And I remember going to the grocery store that day. I mean, I would just, as most of us, I just sat and watched the news all day, crying, watching my mom freak out, my dad, and then I went to the grocery store, and I remember just looking at everybody and knowing this is changing everything. Everything today is changed. Like you could see it in everybody's eyes. The cashier, person wandering in aisle 3, we were just like totally like dazed and confused. And then of course 9/12 was the day that we're all like, let's go get these mofos, because we thought we knew everything. I think that was the moment where I just had, I thought about joining the military, but I had no access to, I didn't know what, I thought everything was infantry. I thought everything was like frontline. It wasn't until I actually went into the recruiter and talked to them and they said, hey, you have a degree in filmmaking. We have combat video. You should look into that. So that's when I was like, oh shit, I think this is for me. 9/11 happened and I went and talked to like a recruiter initially, but it wasn't for me. I wanted to finish college. So when I joined in 2007, it was the height of the Iraq War and they were looking for bodies. Not a lot of people were. They were actually very low in their numbers for recruiting. So when I came in there, they're like, we have combat videographer job locked in. We're going to give you a quick ship bonus. We're going to give you an airborne bonus and you get to go in as a specialist because you have a degree and you get like a bachelor degree bonus. Because I didn't want to go officer. I wanted to be on the front lines with my camera telling the story of soldiers is like what I wanted to do. And they gave me everything I could possibly do. I was kind of perfect for them because I got everything I wanted. I got a huge bonus for being a combat videographer. I got airborne and it was just like, they never lied to me. They did me, my recruiter did me awesome. So I had no hard feelings for it. I mean, obviously the military was totally different than anything I'd ever experienced before though. So father-in-law was an Army recruiter for years. So he gave me a lot of like, this is everything you need to know. And he had just come back from a tour to Iraq. So he was like, his name was Larry, and he was a combat medic. He was a sergeant first class and was in a major hospital in Iraq and prepared me for everything. So I felt like I was physically ready. I mean, I was a physical guy. I played ice hockey in high school, worked out in college. So I was ready for boot camp. You know, I went in with a chip on my shoulder. I was ready to do good. Older than a lot of the other recruits that were there, like a lot of them 18, 19, 20. I was married. Not a lot of guys weren't married. My goal was to just always be top 5 in whatever it was. So like running, I had to work too because I was a bad runner, push-ups and sit-ups, and I just kept my mouth shut and did the shit, you know? One thing that I was super surprised about that I didn't think about basic that stood out to me the most was in the first few weeks, it was just like kind of prison. I've not been to prison, but I can imagine. I was surprised by how kind of racist everybody was at first. It's like the black guys hung out with the black guys, the Latino guys hung out with the Latino guys, the white guys, and so on. And if you're from Texas, you're the Texas white dudes. And if it was, but then like 2 weeks and then 3 weeks into it, it's like nobody gave a fuck about where you were from, what race you were, what religion. It was, are you gonna do the job? Can you do your fucking push-ups? Can you do the run? Are you gonna get me in trouble with the drill sergeant? Are you gonna be a good soldier? And that's what you kind of learn in basic, is that you kind of all have to meld into how are we gonna make this platoon work? There was one private named Private Bamood. He was African, barely spoke English, had been in the country for like a year or something like that. His physical, he couldn't even do push-up or a sit-up at the beginning of basic. So Bamood still we're in a live fire exercise and he forgot to take off his blank firing adapter, which you're only supposed to have on your weapon if you have blanks in it. It's in front of the muzzle and he had live ammo inside of his weapon while he's maneuvering, and he's about to get to a spot where he's going to open up fire on targets with a live weapon, with live ammo, with a blank fire adapter on it. And I see Bamood doing this. And like I had to like watch Bamood throughout the whole time because he didn't understand things like we did because he was from another country. I had to stand up and kill the range and everything and then call out Bamood. And from that moment on though, Bamood was like, Ham saved my life. Like if it wasn't for Ham stopping all of this stuff. And I remember when I stopped it, the drill sergeants came over to me and started like fucking reaming me because why are you calling ceasefire? on a live range. And I'm like, Mahmoud's gonna kill someone or kill himself. And he struggled a lot. He was gonna be an Army aviation helicopter pilot. So fast forward, we leave basic training. It's the one time we get to leave basic. We're at this church with all these nice people who are giving us a Thanksgiving dinner. We're all like amped up on basic. And they had instruments up at the top. If we wanted to go up and play music, we could go up. And nobody gets up because we're just there to eat and leave. Mahmoud gets up and he starts playing piano. And he's like a master jazz musician. Everybody was so annoyed with him because he was the guy who always got us into trouble. He was the guy from Full Metal Jacket, you know, who was just like, oh, he couldn't do it. He couldn't cut it. But when we saw him get up there and we're like, Mahmoud is somebody special, and we just couldn't see that because we're preparing for war. Mahmoud graduated. That was a thing where I think about a lot. When you're training at basic training, you kind of don't want to know all the personal stuff about everybody because you're so focused on getting through the tasks. And so it is easy to like dismiss and dehumanize people on that journey. And I think that was an important moment for me to always remember that like, we're all wearing the same uniform, even though that this guy might be incompetent in one area, he's still somebody that has a whole life and a whole story and a whole thing. So after boot camp, I went to advanced individual training, and for my MOS and any MOS in the Army that was, or military occupational specialty that was artistic related. We had graphic guys, we had combat video, combat camera, writing, and radio. That was all at a school called the Defense Information School, which is at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is where the NSA is. It's like right across the street from the NSA. It's military art school rejects. It's like all the rejects who couldn't get into real film schools, who wanted to do camera, who wanted to do video, who were artistic, but like couldn't get into college, wanted to go here, but couldn't. Just the island of misfit toys. People who were excellent artists, excellent video people, but just couldn't get a hand up in the regular world and wanted to go out and be artistic in the military, you know? So Good Morning Vietnam. Robin Williams' character went to the Defense Information School in the 60s and did the whole radio school. So I went to the same type of radio school, print school, and then video. And then after that, I went to Airborne. I did 3 weeks Airborne school and then was stationed with an Airborne Infantry Brigade in Alaska. 25th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, Airborne. So when I went to Airborne school, I was like not excited. I was excited because I wanted to do some cool guy stuff in the military. I wanted the Maroon Beret. I was not a great runner, and Airborne school was like you had to keep up on the long runs. So that was a struggle for me. Jumping out of the airplanes though, every time I've ever jumped out, I think I have 18 total jumps. I hated every time. My exits out of the C-130 were so bad, I kind of got sucked out and then hit the side of the plane every time. So after my 5th jump, my whole arm was just purple and I felt like I barely got out of that school. But, you know, I got that Maroon Beret and I was super proud of it. You know, I was super proud of getting those wings. Definitely did not want to show up to an airborne infantry unit without my wings. I came with my first wife, who was pregnant at that time. When you kind of are in the military and you have a family, you're a little bit outside of like the guys club a little bit, or at least you could get out of it a little. Plus I didn't have a platoon. So like I was in a public affairs shop that had an officer, a staff sergeant, me, and a combat photographer. That was it. So we were kind of our own little world. You know, we had a headquarters platoon that we would work out with and everything, but they're all compartmentalized. When I arrived in Alaska, the 4th Brigade 25th Infantry had gotten back from Iraq about 5 months earlier, and they had a rough deployment. It was a 12-month deployment that got extended to 16 months. They were there during the Iraq surge. They came back, and I think they had lost 54 dudes. And so it was like it was a hard tour. And so a lot of these soldiers came back and were kind of like ready to take a break, except they had announced right when they got home that you have 1 year turnaround, then you're going to go back to Afghanistan. So 2008 was like if you wanted to stay in the unit, then you were preparing for Afghanistan, which was like half of the unit. And then the other half was like, we need to get out because that tour was brutal. So then I arrive and I'm kind of just in survival mode trying to prepare for my first deployment. You know, I had a son. My son was born September 11th, 2008. And so that was obviously a super meaningful thing for me. And I had started, my first film that I made for the unit was about a company of soldiers in Iraq who had fought a hard fight in Jurfa, Iraq. After my son was born, between September and January when we deployed, I tried to get out with as many infantry guys to do, you know, they're all doing field exercises. I would try to get out as much as possible because I wanted them all to be very familiar with who I was and what I was capable of offering them going out. When you're a personnel other than a grunt, which is, I was a combat camera guy, there's always trepidation walking into those circles and saying, I want to come on a mission with you, because do they trust me? Am I a good soldier? Because they're not watching me train with them. I'm not there every day with them. Part of the ways that these guys are able to trust each other is that they're working out together, they're doing these exercises, they're seeing each other, they know their families. I'm a total outsider, and I am one videographer in a combat brigade of 3,500 soldiers. So like one day I'll go out with Bravo Company of the 501st. The next day I'm out with Charlie Company from the 509th. And then I'm out with another unit doing something else. So my approach was always keep my mouth shut. Other than to make fun of myself, I felt self-deprecating humor with dudes is always a good approach. I would always say, like, if we get to a point where combat camera has to start firing, we're all fucked. So I'm gonna shoot my camera. I'm gonna use my camera unless shit hits the fan. You know, I always try to, when you come with airborne wings, and I always shot expert. You know, I was always trying to keep up on my PT to prove to these guys that I could keep up. I tried to never fall out of the long marches that we had to go on and everything, just try to keep up. But the biggest thing, the way that I ultimately won infantry is by taking the videos that I would capture and putting together a badass video that they could show their families. And that was the thing that I always wanted to tell them. When they would ask me, can we trust you? I'd be like, well, my job is to make you guys look badass. That's my goal. I want your wife and your kids to watch the videos that I'm gonna make and be like, mom is doing something badass out there. And that's what I did. So I made, like, you know, the deployment video before we left. You know, we had a big ceremony where all 3,500 of us were in, you know, a stadium where they do the whole send off, and they showed my video on the screen of like slow motion soldiers doing exercises and fast music. And I think I used Foo Fighters' You're My Hero, stupid ass song. Anyway, I've grown as a filmmaker since then. As someone who wants to tell stories, I kind of have always said, you know, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, did it exist? And for a storyteller, the answer is no. Like, if nobody hears the stories that we're trying to tell, or then they kind of don't exist. The goal is to be seen and heard. And that was always my goal. And I think I have grown fond of the military veteran audience, because I've had experiences where I made something that they could watch with pride and then nudge their wife and be like, see, I told you, that's what I've been doing. Now you could be a little bit less mad because that shit's tough, right? And that's the way, is that the storytelling is able to kind of connect what we're doing with the people who don't get it. So when I saw like my shit on the big screen in front of all of the families, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. This is how, in my little way, little kid from Reseda is able to kind of contribute to this really big thing that's happening. And maybe I'm not a killer, maybe I'm not a front line. I'm not going to be the first guy in the door. I went into a lot of doors. I was never the first guy, but I was there with my camera ready to tell the story. And that was, that's what I was proud to do. Another interesting aspect of that, because I was a specialist at that time, having that level of influence though, in a brigade as a specialist, afforded some special advantages. Unlike most specialists, I knew generals. I knew the 2-star general who had watched the film, who had like signed off on it before. I was always the guy who got the cool guy coin. I mean, my collection of coins for 7 years in the military as a staff sergeant is like bigger than most staff sergeants who have 6 years or 7 years. Just because I made a film, a general saw it and thought it was cool, So sometimes I got out of some special duty kind of bullshit. I was able to get out of a few things because I had a camera and I was just, so yeah. I mean, there was a couple times where I had, when we'd go on missions, and I'll kind of come back, but when we'd go on missions in Afghanistan, we're doing a lot of like air assaults, and you're getting on a Chinook, which has a limited amount of seats. I think it was like max 50 people that can go on a Chinook. If a combat camera is getting on a Chinook, that's one less infantry dude that's getting on a Chinook, is the mindset of the infantry company who is about to go fuck up a village and wherever. So why am I there? I got to get in all these cool guy missions because I had direct access to the brigade commander, who is now saying, Robert has to go on this mission to tell a video story about what you guys are doing because all the wives and the kids at home are asking questions about what the fuck is mommy and dad doing in Afghanistan. How do we tell them what we're doing? That was my job. My job was to make something that can go back home so that the families can see PG-13 version of what their family is doing. Now, it is PG-13 because I worked for the government. I had to self-censor. There was an agreement with the infantry guys with me. There are things I won't film. I'm not an outside journalist. I'm not here to get a gotcha. I'm not here to film if somebody is fucked up. Because I have a sergeant major breathing over my back who doesn't even want me to film if their rank looks wrong on their uniform, let alone if somebody's doing something that they shouldn't be doing. So am I a journalist? I always said I was not a journalist. I worked for the US Army as a combat videographer, and I knew what my mission was: to make the soldiers look cool and to tell their story as emotionally and honestly as I could, considering that I had DoD restrictions. So I had done a lot of traveling leading up to my time in the military. I traveled all over the world already, had been to Europe, had been to Asia, had been all over the United States. I studied a semester in Israel when I was in my undergrad. So I spent 5 months in Israel. I went into Palestine and Israel. I interviewed, kind of like what this is. I went and interviewed Palestinians and Israelis. I got to see like the front lines of what they were doing and what was going on there. I was very interested in what was going on in the Middle East. Obviously, Afghanistan is a very different country, but I think I was really ready to go, and I was really excited and ambitious to go. I think I was leaving your wife and son for a year is a whole thing, and that was really hard. I mean, my son was born September 11th, 2008, and I left 4 months later to go to Afghanistan. So I missed the first year of his life, missed his first steps, missed his first word, missed all those moments that you get as a father for that first year, which, I think in retrospect, I didn't mind because what the hell do I know how to do with a baby? But also, you miss those times. But that's what it was, and a lot of people have missed those times with family. But other than the strain that it caused on my family, I was ready. I mean, I was like chomping at the bit. I wanted to get out and do as much as I possibly could. And when I arrived in Afghanistan, I think I was, scared, anxious, excited, ready to do my job, angry. I was really angry. I think hate and anger motivates a lot of what happens in war for a lot of us in the individual, I mean, I was still seething from 9/11. It was still it was like 2000. I didn't get to Afghanistan until 2009. And by then it was like, we had restructured the way that we thought about the Afghan war. So like, we went into Afghanistan after 9/11. It seemed as though we had kind of like did everything we needed to do by December of 2001. So we kind of like shifted priorities to Iraq. At that time, I actually joined in 2007 because I wanted to go to Iraq because I was afraid I was going to miss that war, basically. Because I believed in the weapons of mass destruction and the global war on terror, and I thought that Iraq was probably a better war to do that than Afghanistan. Now I've changed my thought on all that, but that's what I thought at the time. So when I went to Afghanistan, I wasn't really sure what we were even going to do there, other than we had shifted the strategy. President Obama was going to do a surge now because this was the right war. You know, Iraq was the wrong war. We got segmented for 8 years. Afghanistan's the war we should have been in since 2001. Now we're going to pick up where we left off and we're going to charge in. And my airborne infantry unit was the tip of the spear in the region that we were in to do the surge. So I don't know if I believed in the mission, but I believed that we were. I did believe that we could do what we said that we were going to do, I guess. When I first got to Afghanistan, you know, the mission of what a public affairs person does is a little convoluted, because it's like we have to understand what this war is so that we can explain it back to the people back home, except most of the officers that were in charge couldn't tell you what we're doing. I mean, counterinsurgency, coin. That's the doctrine that I had to like pound in my head to understand what our strategy was there. And so I think the first month I was there, they didn't even know how to use me or our public affairs shop. So actually I was super underutilized the first month, and I was mad about it. We had just gotten in and we had transitioned, and my brigade commander was super conservative with public affairs because he was afraid of the story, because you don't want any of the bullshit getting out there or what's going on or how bad the war's going or anything like that. So they put me, I just did guard duty every other day. The other days I just begged them to let me go outside the wire, and they kind of held on to me a little too closely that first month. On my own time, I did a story about explosive ordnance disposal team. I found these guys, I went over there, I found my own story, I made friends with them. They convinced my command to let me go out, and they had found a vehicle-borne IED in the city host. It's 10,000 pounds of homemade explosives that these guys found. They brought EOD out, and these guys and gals have balls of steel and just did what they did and brought it all back to the base. And now we have 10,000 pounds of homemade explosive and all of this munitions and stuff that they found. And they're like, we're going to spend all day blowing this up. Would you like to come? And I'm like, yes, please. Like, I can't wait. So I spent all day with these EOD guys blowing up like these big explosions. And I think that was my first outside the wire mission. And it was easy. It's we have security. Nothing's going to happen. We spent all day blowing up and making these big mushroom cloud explosions. And it was awesome. And it was just like broing out, blowing shit up. A little Afghan kid stole one of my cameras and ran off with it because I had let one of the infantry guys use it to film. And he kind of like left it on the rock or something for 5 seconds. And an Afghan kid grabbed it and stole it and ran off. And who knows where that camera is. But that was my first outside the mission. And then I made that story, the EOD story, and I gave it to EOD first. I said, EOD, watch this. And EOD was like, oh, fuck, yeah, this is it. Cool video, Ham. And then we sent that to the commander, and he's like, oh, this is what you do. Oh, this is what you're capable of doing. Get him out of here. No more guard duty, no more sitting around the base, get him out with the units. And then that's when I started going out on units. So it was like a really slow beginning. And then it was just like every time a cool unit was doing something, I tried to get out with them. I mean, there was always mortars. There's always like random pop shots and shooting and stuff going on. I got my combat action badge from my first. I mean, I probably could have gotten it a few times, but the first time I got it was a big mortar attack that happened, and we responded with artillery and stuff, and got really close. The mortars got really close. I was with Saifullah one time when, I mean, it's in the film Interpreters Wanted, where we heard outgoing, or what we thought was outgoing, and we step outside of our public affairs office, and like it was like 20, 30 meters in front of us, a huge explosion from a mortar. And I look at Saifullah and he looks at me, and we just start laughing just because we're like, holy shit, we could have died. Look at that. What are we doing? And then we ran to the bunker, and I'm like, oh shit, I need my camera. So I ran from the bunker back to the thing, grabbed my camera and came back, and that kind of shit. So Saifullah is he's just like my brother. I made a film called Interpreters Wanted about Saifullah and Ishmael. Ishmael is Saifullah's younger brother, and these are two interpreters that I had served with in Afghanistan. I always tell the story, when I first saw Saifullah, he was sitting in the public affairs shop that now would be my home for the next year, but he had been there for 5 years previous with each new rotation of infantry units that would come in that he would support. And he was reading a book like literally that thick in English about the Gulf War on a chapter about Colin Powell, and knew more about Colin Powell as an example than I did, and was very eloquent English speaker, spoke 5 languages, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And he's just sitting there, and when I first walked in and I saw him, I'm like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what he does. I don't know anything about him. And could he be a bad guy? And there were times that even some of the people in our military circles, our unit, treated him like that. We couldn't trust him on secret phones. There were times where he would get, so there's a lot of times where, looking back, I think people in their inability to trust Afghans, whether they were Afghan army, Afghan interpreters, or anybody, that lack of trust played over in a lot of areas that, are kind of like the I guess the sad human toll of just, being in war. But Saifullah and Ishmael became very, very good friends of mine. We were in attacks together. We spent a lot of time together, and I'm still friends with them. They live in San Antonio, and they're like my brothers. So, like any job in the military trains you really well. So they trained me really well to know how to handle a weapon, handle my gear, and handle my camera, and all the things I needed to do. So, I had a system. I had like I carried my weapon on my right and my camera on my left. And when I needed to use my weapon, I threw my camera over on my shoulder and it dangled behind me, and I was ready, and then, but most of the time I wanted to film, so, there was a naive safety behind the camera. There wasn't safety, right? I was there with everybody else. But when you put the camera up and you're looking through a lens, or you're looking through the screen, it's almost feels like a shield. Because now instead of looking at all the 360, I'm looking at the very specific image that I'm looking at. A guy's face, a gun, an Afghan kid, fucking trees, I don't know, whatever I was filming, I ended up filming hundreds of hours of footage in Afghanistan that year. And I think it kind of protected me from the stuff that was actually happening. I mean, I remember the first time I filmed someone dying, as an example, which you're never, as a public affairs person, you're really never supposed to film wounded soldiers. It's like part of our thing. So I've really very seldom filmed injured or dying soldiers. But there was a couple of times where I filmed dying Afghans. And I remember the first time I did that, when I looked at the footage later, it felt very insensitive, like what I was doing. I actually probably have never used most of that footage, because I was just like, well, why did I zoom in there? What was I doing? But I think I was trying to Like, this isn't like a Hollywood set. Like, this is not somebody with like fake blood and a fake blown up leg or something. Like, this is somebody like that's probably going to die and that's injured. And I remember filming it. And then later when I looked at the footage, that's when I was able to process it and like kind of like was shocked by it because I didn't think about it while I was doing it. And I think that's one of the things that like is an advantage of being just a grunt, because you go in, you do the thing, and then you move on. Compartmentalize it. We did some shit today. We moved on. Let's move on. Like with what I was doing, I was there watching it, and then I'd come back and I'd like overanalyze it over and over again, looking at the footage and stuff. And I think that's when the darkness of the war and the combat stuff kind of hit me, was like later, because I got to like watch it over and over again. But when I'm in the moment, it felt safe to be behind the camera. It felt like I was able to kind of put myself separate from what was actually going on. December 30th, 2009 was the largest loss of death in CIA history. And it was when, actually they show this scene in Zero Dark 30. It's actually in the very middle of Zero Dark 30. What had been going on is that there was a Jordanian he was a triple agent, because he was working for basically the Haqqanis, the Al-Qaeda, for several years, had convinced the Jordanians that he was cool, who had convinced us that he was cool. And he had convinced the CIA that he knew where Osama bin Laden was. So this is all like talks about in Zero Dark 30. So they were supposed to meet this guy at Combat Outpost Chapman, which was a small CIA base in Khost, Afghanistan, on the kind of close to the border of Pakistan. I was on Forward Operating Base Salerno, which was about a click from Cop Chapman. Combat action had kind of slowed down in around November to January because it got winter, and a lot of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda went over into the Fatah region, or to Pakistan, basically, and the fighting season would come back in the spring. There weren't as many missions I was going on from like Thanksgiving till like January. I got on call with the combat medevac team, and they gave me a walkie-talkie. Combat medevac are like dust off, which was like basically like Black Hawk helicopters with the big cross on it. They're just like a medevac. They're like an ambulance. There is a rule called the Golden Hour that had happened starting, I think, in Iraq in like 2007 or 2008, that we guaranteed any soldier who was wounded in our AO could get medevaced out within 1 hour, anywhere in the country. That's what our promise was to soldiers who were getting wounded. So these medevacs were up and down all the time. So they gave me, so we were getting, anytime anybody got wounded, these medevacs, these medical teams would get into the Black Hawks, would go off, pick up people and bring them back to the hospital. So I had my own radio with the dust off folks, and they'd call me. I'd get the call, and I had between 10 to 15 minutes to get all my gear, get to the flight line to take off with them. And so I was doing some stories on December 30th, I got the call, and I got on the bird, and we landed like right after this huge explosion that had happened at Combat Chapman. So this Jordanian double agent, was able to, they basically didn't check him to come on to this base because he had said, I have this information, I don't want you to check me. And they ignored the protocols to let him on the base. Then when he got on the base, he had a IED vest that he blew himself up on. Since Beirut in the 80s, it was the largest loss of CIA life, where I basically landed with the medevac team several times to pick up all of these folks. That was one of the most chaotic days for me in the war, because there were no rules. I filmed a lot of stuff. The people who were killed, there was also a whole bunch of other people wounded. And then they're bringing all these people back to the hospitals, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Nobody knew what was going on. So I was just kind of like filming all of it in the middle of that whole mess. And then not until years later do you realize like what actually happened, because a lot of this stuff was like classified, who was killed. We didn't even know who got killed because they were CIA people. It wasn't until I was like in the theater watching Zero Dark 30 when that happened that I'm like, holy shit, like that was a crazy day. There were things that I shut my camera off for out of respect of the situation. Like right now, the situation is turn the camera off and help. Be a soldier, follow orders. I mean, there were times that I'd have somebody who outranked me say, turn the fucking camera off. And I don't know who you are, but you outrank me, so okay. I'll have my boss talk to your boss. I don't know, that doesn't really fly sometimes when you're in combat. You just do whatever they tell you to do. There's certain things you don't film. That was the brotherhood. A lot of the situations that went wrong, I felt like as a combat videographer, I'd show up afterwards. So like one of the biggest stories that I did was called Attack on the 4th of July. It was a huge attack that happened on July 4th, 2009. It was a remote combat outpost. They had estimated, I don't know, anywhere from 100 to 200 Taliban dudes that surrounded this base. They had every weaponry that they could possibly have. They had a vehicle IED with 10,000 pounds of homemade explosives that they blew up right outside the gate. They almost overran this whole base. I show up like a week and a half after that attack to tell their story. So there, it was really still raw, like really raw. I mean, they were still kind of like cleaning up the mess and rebuilding the HESCO walls and fixing the gate and all that stuff when I'm showing up. They had lost 2 mortarmen, Justin Casillas and Aaron Fairbairn. They were 19 and 20 years old. Aaron Fairbairn was hit with a mortar and Justin Casillas threw him on his shoulders and ran through enemy fire to take him to the medic bay. Subsequently, he was hit with a mortar and then they both died. Justin Casillas posthumously received the Silver Star. I wore their bracelet for years. I think about them a lot. I didn't know them. I remember seeing them around, but you know, they're just in another unit. You don't really. But when I went, when I went to this base about a week and a half after the attack, started interviewing the guys and filming them. And I hung out with them I was there almost, I think, a week and a half, 2 weeks. And it's like a remote outpost. I mean, they're burning their shit. They're taking water bottle showers. They're right outside of a village, so they're getting contact all the time. And they're also guarding the village and doing foot patrols all the time. And they were a close-knit group of dudes who were not initially welcoming to me, but then understood what I was doing. The Taliban had filmed the attack from 5 different camera angles. There was like 5 versions of Robert out there filming the attack. And so once they got all of that footage and let me have it for my film, we did recreations. I had them like, it's the wild, wild west out there. So I'm like, hey, can you open up fire on that mountain just so that I could film it? And they're like, sure. And they'd open up with a 50 cal. And it was like, I was just a fly on the wall there to kind of see what these guys went through. But I could still feel like the interviews that I got from them were super raw and like honest. And they were great. We did a lot of missions together. We did like a 72-hour walk mission through the mountains with them, found IEDs, and we got shot at a few times. And Able Company of the 509th. And they were fucking warriors that day. I mean, they just held off. They were completely surrounded. Air assets could not get to them in time. This was during the whole Bo Bergdahl situation, which is a whole nother thing that I was a part of because he was part of our unit. Our air assets were kind of spread thin. They didn't get there. It took them 3 hours to get Apaches to that attack. It was crazy. The film that I've been working on basically since then is called Searching for Bergdahl. It's a documentary about the whole Bo Bergdahl situation, what happened, the mystery surrounding why he left, what happened while he was gone, the extent of the search, what happened when he came home, all of that. Interestingly, Bo got to our unit the same time I did in the summer of 2008. He was in the 501st Infantry. And I was like over here. So I only crossed paths with him a couple times. I actually filmed him at a memorial ceremony in December of 2008. So he walks off June 30th of 2009. And our unit was like full force. Like, this is the mission. The mission is find this kid. There were 6 soldiers that were supposedly killed looking for Bo. However, the nature of war is way more complicated than being able to say like, these guys were there on missions looking for Bo, and that's why they were killed. I don't like to say that that's what happened, but regardless, we lost 13 guys that whole deployment. Patrick Devoe was the first guy we lost. He got killed in an IED. That was one of my other films I made. I showed up to that unit. Like, my public affairs officer was an infantry guy before he came public affairs. So he had done a deployment to Iraq, and he was a hard charger. But one thing he required that I had to be, and that was any memorial for anybody that was killed in RAO, I had to go and film the memorial, and then I had to make a little DVD package and I had to send it to the family. That was like, no matter what happened, no matter what, Robert, you could, well, Specialist Ham, you do whatever the fuck you want to do. But when I will take you off of a mission if somebody dies to send you to the memorial. And so they would do these little combat memorials, right? I did a video called Continuing the Fight for a Fallen Brother, because Devoe was our first guy killed. Basically, that unit went on a vengeance mission after he got killed and found the guy who planted the IED and killed him. And I was there. It started when I went to his memorial, and I lived with those guys for a couple weeks. And they wouldn't stop talking about Patrick Devoe. They wouldn't stop talking about him. What a good guy he was, his character. He was 28. He joined when he was 27. Like, what dude joins when he's 27, the Army, and has a sense of humor and is like a good guy, and he was like well liked, and he just like was the guy that happened to be in that seat the day they hit an IED, you know. Good soldier, all the things. The unit really liked it, and interestingly, I think it was like 10 years later, on the day that Devoe had died, I got an email from his mom who said, I could never watch the film when you made it years ago, but I just watched it. Thank you for making it. And that's how I felt about all the guys that we lost, you know. And now I'm making this movie called, you know, Searching for Bergdahl. And to me, it doesn't really matter like what mission any of these guys were on. It doesn't matter to me. It matters that they were there serving their country. They were killed in action doing what our country asked them to do, you know. Darren Andrews, doesn't matter what mission they were on, although the mission that Darren was on was to secure the elections that were happening in August of 2009. So that was our main mission in Afghanistan there. We were going to host and help secure free elections for the Afghan government in 2009, which they had never had ever, basically, real elections. That was our main mission. All of our units were out there trying to secure the different regions. And Darren Andrews they were on a mission. He was getting out of the truck. He sees a Taliban guy pop over a berm with an RPG, and he fires the RPG at Jason Zavodny, who is his staff sergeant. Darren pushes Jason out of the way and takes the RPG to his chest. He was a first lieutenant. It was his second deployment. Years later, I interviewed his wife, who was pregnant at the time and had a 2-year-old son. He was like everybody loved Darren. He's a great leader. I interviewed his parents, who are wonderful people, Texans through and through. He received the Silver Star posthumously. He received the Texas Medal of Honor. You know, I could go on. There's like all these guys, you know. Kurt Curtis, he was another amazing guy who I had met before we deployed, and I had known of his reputation. He had done 3 deployments prior to Afghanistan. He had a wife and 3 kids and was not supposed to go on this deployment. And I interviewed the sergeant major. His name is Sergeant Major Wolf. One of the most stable, amazing leaders at the command sergeant major level that I had seen. He was the 501st commander, and he just had a way with him. And I did a lot of missions with him too. And he had told me we were lacking staff sergeant leaders moving into Afghanistan because the Iraq tour was really beat up on some people and they wanted time with their family. They didn't want to turn around and go do another war. Kurt Curtis was not supposed to go on that. We needed guys like him. So Sergeant Major Wolf calls in Staff Sergeant Curtis and says, I need you to come on this deployment with me. We need your leadership. Kurt Curtis goes back to his wife, tells his wife and his 3 kids. She says, okay, this is your last one. His story is crazy. And I tell his story in Searching for Bergdahl. He was the first one in the door on a bad mission, got shot in the head, killed immediately, 4th deployment. Shouldn't have ever been there, but he was. And those are the kind of guys that like we have to remember. I think about him all the time, you know. And I didn't know him, but I know his story now, and I carry his story with me. It was pretty quick that I started to trust Saiful and Ishmael. They were with us. They had our previous unit could validate them. And so I grew close to them fairly quickly. The Afghan National Army soldiers were always kind of suspect for us. As the war continued I think by the time it's 2011, 2012, 2013 in the war, the blue on green, like the Afghan soldier, we started getting a lot of like Afghan soldiers turning their weapons on Americans. And that started to happen later. But by 2009, it wasn't happening as much. Every American platoon we had an Afghan platoon go with us. And they did the same shit that we did. They fired in the same direction that we did. They were on the, I watched them get, a couple of them get blown up and killed. We were humping the mountains with these guys, and they were doing it. And they were doing it for their country. So when I started to fight alongside the Afghans who were fighting the bad guys that we were, then you're like, oh shit, some of these guys are warriors. One time in particular, I spent a couple nights at a very remote outpost, exactly like Restrepo. It's like it was like built from the mud with this platoon, and they'd cycle out every 7 days with another platoon. So they'd spend a week on top of this mountain in the middle of nowhere. And they had an Afghan infantry platoon with them while they're up there. And I mean, this is like the worst camping ever. They didn't have an attack while I was up there, but they were always getting attacked, I don't know, I just kind of grew a healthy respect for the Afghan soldiers that were there. And really, we all needed to have some respect for the enemy too, because they're doing some hard shit to fight us out there. And as soon as you stop respecting what they're doing is when you could get hurt. I grew a level of respect, but you're always wary. You never know what any of these guys are thinking and how good are they. That was always a topic of conversation. These are the good Afghans. These are the medium. That guy. I played by the military rules as much as possible, and you don't go off base. You don't like that scene in Hurt Locker where he just like left the base to go into the village or whatever. Like I didn't have that out. Nobody, I never really got to go see Saiful and Ishmael's home, which I would have loved to. Saiful commuting to the base every day was, he had to change routes almost every day because an IED blew up this bridge, or like there's bad guys at this area. I remember one time though, to answer, I guess, we did an interpreters conference. They wanted to get some public affairs advice. And so it was like at this big weekend long thing. It was like a governor meeting, and they had like the governors of the different regions come out, and by day the Afghans were interpreting, and I was there. And then we had like all the interpreters come and let's talk to Sergeant Ham about public affairs and all this stuff. So we're sitting there and and all the interpreters are there, and all they wanted to talk about was sex. They didn't want to talk about anything else. They just had like the level of repression in Afghan culture sexually is like so high that they're just like super curious about Americans. I saw a lot of Afghan culture through going into villages and doing what we were doing as an infantry unit. Most of the time you just see them doing what they do, and then you have a more personal exchange when you have to go in and tear up their houses or tear up their village for weapons. Or I think a super humbling thing for me was hearing how hard the war was on Saifullah. He commuted from a village to our base. He had to be there early every morning. Every time he would get in the car to go to and from the base is a dangerous situation for him. It got so bad for his family that while we were there, his house got blown up. Nobody was hurt, but he decided to move his whole family to Kabul with his cousins and some other family that lived up there to basically abandon their home in Khost, which is where they grew up and lived, And Saifullah moved to live on the base with us. And so he lived in the journalist hooches with, you know, the Fox News and CNN guys when in full time after his house got blown up. And that was really super hard for him. Saifullah was happy that his family felt safer now in Kabul, but now he's away from his family. He's still doing a hard job. He's living on the base. So it was always dangerous for them. Saifullah and Ishmael are like as patriotic as any for their country, Afghanistan, as any American I've ever met for America. They love Afghanistan. They love the country. If you were to sit down with Saifullah and Ishmael, it would be within the first 5 minutes, Ishmael would pull up a photo of how beautiful Afghanistan is and how proud he is of that country. They were probably more idealistic than any of us on the American side that this could work, that we could make this happen. Saifullah and Ishmael wanted it to work in Afghanistan because they hate the Taliban. They wanted to have a democracy, they wanted to have a Western influence, they wanted to have freedom, and they wanted to worship, do business, do what they wanted to do without all this war happening. And that was their hope. But by 2008, 2009, Saifullah and Ishmael had already been doing this war with us for 5 years. And that's when they started looking at getting out of that country because it didn't look like the war was going to end anytime soon. I mean, by the time I was getting there, President Obama had started a surge. We were sending 30 to 50,000 more soldiers to Afghanistan, and we needed the best interpreters, and we needed all of them. And so no Afghan interpreters were getting out of that country. That's the beginning of the journey that I start to tell and interpreters wanted about how Saifullah and Ishmael ended up getting out of that country, but it took years and years. Would go back tomorrow if it was safe. Actually, Ishmael would probably go back tomorrow if it wasn't safe, because that's how much he cares about that country. I think Saifullah is over war. He's been in war his whole life. He's ready. He's just like, I'm done. He got his citizenship. He's an American. His 4th child was born in America. He loves this country. Ishmael does too. When you're forced out of a country that you love, it's just a tragic thing. We're always comparing like our experience to other people's experiences. And I always felt like, oh, I just did one deployment. As soon as I got back from Afghanistan, I wanted to go back. I had never felt more appreciation for what I was offering the world. I had never been so passionate about my job. I had never wasn't making a lot of money as a sergeant, but I've never made more money. I mean, coming back from a deployment untaxed, you're like, holy shit, I actually have money. I'm like, you know, as opposed to working all the stupid jobs I did before the military. I had respect now. I had rank. I was a sergeant. I had a combat action badge and all this stuff. I thought I was like badass and I wanted to go back again. My late wife was like, don't, you can't. I'm gonna leave if you go back. That's just how it was, you know. And so I went on to Hawaii and then did all my Hawaii stuff. At the end of the day, what I try to tell veterans is what you did was enough. I did everything that I wanted to do in the military. I did a deployment. I checked off all the lists. I made rank real quick. I never got into trouble. I got all the little cool medals and all the things that you could do in the military. And so I'm proud of my service. I'm proud of what I did. I didn't leave anything in the game. I put it all in there, and now I've grown to a point in my life where now I could do that for my family, for my people. I could put it all in the game every day by just trying to be a better person and being there for my kids and being there for my wife. And that just because I didn't fucking die or get my legs blown off, or I didn't get it as hard as some other people that came back from those wars, that there's other ways that I could contribute. By the time that I was getting out of the military in 2013, I could have pretty much gone anywhere that my MOS allowed me to. I got asked to go to a whole bunch of different spots. I won the Military Videographer of the Year 3 times in a row, which is the most in Army history. This is a moment that was profound for me. I was sitting in my office, 8 months before I was going to get out, talking with a buddy. What the fuck do I do now? I know I'm going to get out. He's like, well, what do you want to do? I want to do film. He said, well, use your GI Bill. I'm like, okay, where do I go? He's like, what school have you always wanted to go to, but never had the balls to apply or didn't think you could? And I'm like, well, I'm from Los Angeles. There's only one film school I've ever wanted to go to, I've ever even thought about going to. It's USC. There's no way I could have ever gotten into USC. My grades sucked, was not even close to being able to pay for USC. You know what? I have the GI Bill. I applied. It was the only school I applied to and I got in. And so that was really a helpful transition tool for me, because it's like I went literally from the military, and I actually had overlap to go to USC. I actually had another month of leave. I didn't have any time to sit and think about what my future was. I knew exactly what the next 3 years was going to be. Plus I was in the reserve, so I still had the reserve time while I was doing USC. Transitioning though from the military, being that level of respect and all the things that I had there, to going to this top film school, which is, they call it the University of Spoiled Children for a reason. So transitioning, I was like able to just focus on film, but over time I just I didn't know who I was anymore. I was struggling with who I wanted to be, what my purpose was. My family situation was deteriorating. I was drinking more. I was isolating more. I was hiding and lying about stuff more. I was just in a very toxic situation that did spiral to the point where I felt like I was hurting the people around me, didn't have the value that I had before, and I did not only think about killing myself, but I loaded a gun and thought really seriously about it and got drunk and was like, okay, I think I could do this. And it took me a few years to get out of that mentality too. I had to do a lot of work. I had to make some relationships right. I had to cut off some relationships. I had to admit to some of the stupid shit that I was getting involved in. I just had to make some major changes. And that was all hard because you don't know you need help until all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, now I really fucked up my life. That was a pathway, and I'm still healing, still growing and learning and dealing with the demons, and thankful for how far I've come and thankful to the people who have been there for me along the way, I think when we have powerful experiences with people that we've grown to love and they're not here anymore, we want other people to understand both our pain, also the experience of that person that's not here anymore. Because when we can humble ourselves and put ourselves in the shoes of people who have gone before us, sacrificed, done hard things, it humbles me to say, I'm still here for a reason. I'm still here to do what God put me here to do. That person's not here anymore. This group of people are not here anymore. How they got to being not here anymore is really tragic and sad. And we as a society need to honor that. I think the only way that we could truly honor people is by understanding what they went through. And story is as ancient as humans. We pass down stories through millennia. Our greatest stories of our religions, our greatest stories of our mythological heroes and our real heroes and our societal values are baked into the stories that we tell each other. I lost my first wife to cancer, and one of the things that I told my kids, which is probably one of the hardest things to go through when you're losing their mom. I didn't know what to say at times, but one of the stories that I have to tell myself that I told my kids through this trial that we were going through was about my great-grandma. My great-grandma is an Armenian genocide survivor. So my mom's side is Armenian. When the genocide started in 1915, my great-grandma was 12. She watched her whole family murdered, basically one by one. Her father was beat to death by the Turkish soldiers. Her oldest sister committed suicide on the long march to the death camps. Her mother and her baby brother were smothered in a crammed train on the way to the death camps. And she made it all the way as a 12-year-old to Der Zor, which was basically like the Auschwitz. It was like what the Auschwitz was for the Jewish people and the Nazis was what Der Zor was. It was the place where most of the Armenians were being taken and worked to death and murdered. It was the biggest camp. And she was able to escape that camp to become basically an Iraqi man's third wife throughout her teenage years. My great-grandma survived this genocide. after watching all of her family and made it to America at 18 years old. The resilience that it took for that woman to do all that, to get to that, and then to get to America and to still have kids, which were my grandparents. And then I remember sitting on my great grandma's lap growing up. I think I was 12 when she passed. She started telling me stories about the genocide when I was like 6 or 7. I mean, she told me how she watched her family get murdered when I was 8. Just like in passing conversation. I didn't even know what was going on, but she was now the story carrier of this genocide now from first eyes experience. And now I am her great grandchild who now have to carry this story, because if we don't remember what happened to the Armenians, if the Armenians don't remember what happened to the Armenians, the rest of the world is not going to. I mean, Turkey still denies it. There's still people that deny the genocide, don't want to talk about it. So once you forget these pockets of history, it's the stereotype, or it's the cliche, we're doomed to repeat it. Absolutely, 100%. That's why we have to understand the Holocaust and what happened to the Jewish people during World War II. That's why we have to understand what happens to war and how easily we are able to dismiss humans and push them aside and kill them for our own political causes or for money or for power or for whatever. That's what I think about when I go into each of my stories. It's like, how do I humanize people so that they're relatable to people way outside of their common experience, and preserve that story so that my kids and their kids and their kids have access to a story that will make ultimately all of us a little bit better, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more kind, and also righteous indignation for the evil that happens out there. Because I'm also not naive to the brutality of evil men and women and what hard people have to do in order to stop it. I've been doing filmmaking a long time. I kind of, I grind. That's what I do. I go from story to story and I try to do the best I can, and then I move on to the next story. And I'm a story kind of collector. You could see my collection of stories on my website, Hammer Productions, HAMMR, no E, productions.com. My latest documentary, Interpreters Wanted, can be seen on veterantv.com. They are partners with me on that film. And you could go there and check it out. I have a film called Searching for Bergdahl that I'm working on that tells that whole story of the long search for Bo Bergdahl, the soldier that walked off his base in 2009, and the subsequent drama that happened after. I have another film called Zaslow K427, which is about the longest tenured mine detection dog team in post 9/11 history. He was Juan Colon Estrada, was a Puerto Rican American soldier who was partnered with Zaslow K427, and they did 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 10 years of service together, which is really rare. It's usually like 1, maybe 2 deployments with the same dog, but 3 deployments is pretty much unheard of in 10 years. And Zaslow was able to retire with Juan. Zaslow, the dog, was actually named after a man who was killed on 9/11, Ira Zaslow, and because they were naming these dogs after 9/11 victims. So that's like an interesting tie to 9/11. So it's a really heartwarming story that documentary is almost done. There's some information about it on my website. Other than the documentaries and the feature films that I'm working on, I'm working on a horror movie about veteran suicide that I think is really good. And then I have my day job, though, is I do a lot of work with the VA, with the Veterans Administration Hospital. I do subcontracting video work, which is sometimes as boring as it sounds, and sometimes is actually really cool. We've done some really great, we've told some really great stories about what's going on in the VA on the positive side. I also have done literally films that are on my website about scandals that have happened in the VA. So I'm very aware of the difficult bureaucratic nature, the struggles that veterans have within the VA system, and how complicated that can be to navigate. And yet, I also believe it's a system that our government has put into place going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln started what was called the Old Soldiers Home system, which then eventually evolved into the VA, and it's meant to house and home and feed and clothe and also give health care to veterans. And that's the system that's been in place, and I think that's the system that we have, and for all of its flaws, there's a lot of good things that are happening. I think the VA partnered with a lot of these veteran service organizations, American Legion, VFW, DAV, but also a lot of the nonprofits that you and I were just talking about that veterans are doing, you know, Wounded Warrior Project all the way to surfing with veterans, canine for veterans, horses for veterans, ketamine retreats, psilocybin stuff. Like, we are full force. How do we heal the service member community? And I think the VA is a crucial part of that conversation. So I'm really proud of that work also. And it's also like, I have a very realistic understanding of what the limitations are. So ultimately, like, the thing that I want to tell a lot of veterans is that the same tenacity, ambition, courage, even confusion, and all the things that got us into the service are the same things that could give us our life back too on this side. Like, I have gained a huge amount of resilience from my service. I've gained a huge amount of confidence in myself and the people around me that have done the same thing. Thanks to Urban Valor. Thank you, Josh, for letting me come and spill my, stories and stuff. I really appreciate it. I oftentimes don't have people ask me about my story. I'm usually the one doing what you're doing. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.